A blinding flash of light, and then nothing. The impact that caused my unfortunate fate on this damned land was quite a surreal one. Completely unexpected, yet destructive nonetheless. It was a miracle I was even alive, for after the debris and dust had settled, all that remained of my ship was a ruined carcass of a machine, serving a single purpose now: salvaging. I looked around me, assessing my surroundings, and subsequently my fate. All was barren for miles, except for a few lonely trees here and there, huddled together like flocks of green birds. Fortunately, the atmosphere accommodated my lungs, and I gasped in a breath of fresh air. The trees weren't the only source of hope on this planet, for I noticed something quite reassuring beneath me. The soil was covered with precious minerals: iron, gathered in clumps and shining from the sunlight; copper, abundant and orange in color; and coal, the black gold, strewn about widely on the surface. I jumped up in excitement. My years as an engineer will finally pay off, I told myself, and quickly began harvesting those ore-sized pieces of hope. The resources that survived the crash proved essential, and with them, I started building the beginning of what will be my road to salvation: a coal miner. As I finished construction of the first machine, I immediately realized a slight problem with my plan: power. Widely looking about, I noticed something far off into the horizon: blue, clear, and calm water. Hours went by and the first signs of construction were showing. The miner was operational from the power of the boilers, steam engines, and the pump that was carrying tons of precious water. I promised myself that even if my escape from this planet required even the tiniest amounts of pollution, I shall look for a different solution, for what honor is there in destroying the world that you live in? As the days, weeks, and months went by, I began to truly appreciate my achievements. Just 113 days ago, I crash-landed on a barren planet, one that seemed to serve as my early grave. 113 days later, I was fortunate enough to look upon my glorious factory and think to myself, how could one man do this? It was magnificent. The power plants, boilers, and steam engines all breathing together in a harmonious manner, generating heaps upon heaps of power for the machines to devour, producing tons and tons of materials per hour. Mining, smelting, purifying, fabricating all happened before me, all working smoothly and as intended. Not the tiniest bit of error about it. It was perfection. The conveyor belts were carrying raw materials and products to and fro, delivering and supplying without fail. Inserters were carrying products from one fabricator to the next, making the most wonderful of sounds: the grinding of gears, the hissing of steam, and the creak of machinery. Oh, how that ambience pleased me. It was a sign of productivity, of progress, a sign of making that next step towards home. Home. That was the end goal, I kept telling myself. That was what kept me going through all those countless hours of engineering and reverse engineering my machinery. It was exhausting work, but I loved every second of it. The joy persisted for long after, until I took one look at the water. It was the murkiest of colors, a dark bubbling green, completely engulfing that lovely blue color of the lake I knew. I was appalled. How did this happen? Have I not been conservative? Have I not recycled every bit of material I could, minimized all pollution to a near zero? Apparently not, I thought to myself, and here was proof. Regret muddled my mind, but then fear quickly took its place. For across the horizon, I spotted a sickly creature, an insectoid with a dark blue exoskeleton. Even at that distance, I could see that it was enraged, threatening, and charging at full speed. The creature was closing in fast. I didn't have much time to react, but I knew that whatever that thing was, its intentions were murderous. There was no time to try and hide, as the part of the factory I was in was flat and open, so the only option was to fight it. Fight it how? I asked myself. Unfortunately, I was idiotic enough to not predict such a situation, and there wasn't as much of a trace of a weapon on me. Panic struck me then, and I, for some godforsaken reason, froze. Staring into the pitch-black eyes of that insectoid made me realize a terrifying truth. Everything I had built for the past months, everything I worked so hard for in order to survive, will be made null. Because of what? Because of a simple error in judgment, thinking that this barren planet was devoid of predators. I stood there staring at it for what seemed like an eternity, until it finally reached me, and with a screeching roar, attempted to bite me full in the face. In that moment, I snapped. No, I won't let the spawn of hell get the best of me, not without a fight. I quickly remembered my wrench. I've worked with that thing since forever and it has served me well as a tool. Now, it must serve me as a weapon. Clutching the wrench with both my hands, I aimed at the large head of the creature. The blow landed with a sickening crunch. It made another screeching noise, this one filled with more pain than anger. I swung again, and the sound of metal on bone was delightful. I slowly regained my confidence, and I swung one more time. The creature swerved, and my blow hit nothing but air, leaving me wide open for the creature to bite my right leg. The pain was blinding. I let out a scream and swung my wrench madly through the air. It stepped back. I swung again and missed. It was hopeless. I was going to die now. This mad monster was going to eat me whole, and I could only stand there and swing. And swing I did. As the creature stepped back, one of my mad swings landed on the creature's neck. Its head snapped, and the creature fell to the ground, shrieking one last time as it made its final death throes, full of anger and contempt. I stood there panting heavily. It was finally dead. A sigh of relief escaped my lips, and I collapsed onto the ground. I was so close to dying. This cannot happen again. I quickly composed myself and set to work. All machinery in the factory would now be directed to one simple objective: produce weaponry. It wasn't enough that I kill one. I had to exterminate these vermin from this land. Their blight will no longer impede my factory's expansion, and my goal to get back home. Over the next week, stockpiles of ammunition and weapons of all sorts were produced. Gun turrets were constructed near every major area of the factory, and 10-feet-high walls made of solid stone were placed around the perimeter. All of this was done by hundreds of hovering robots. They were my most efficient creations yet, and they seemed to operate by pure magic, although I knew it was entirely effort and hard work that led them to being the wonders that they are. They mainly assisted in the construction and protection of the factory, but I decided to take one and give it a brain of some sort. I was admittedly getting quite lonely on this planet, and I needed a companion. Thus, Jerry was born. He was quite chatty and cheery, and he made some of the more monotonous parts of my daily routine quite bearable to go through. I developed a sort of affection toward him, like an owner to his pet, and if anything were to have happened to him, I would have made sure the culprit would never see the light of day again. After about a week and a half of preparation, I was ready. I brought Jerry with me, entered the car, and started to follow the trail of that biter that attacked me a while ago. Biter is the name I chose for those creatures. I assumed there were more of them, because of obvious reasons. After about an hour of driving, I spotted them in the distance, 3 huge mounds of flesh. As I approached closer, I noticed some more of the details. The sight was disgusting. The mounds had numerous holes on their surfaces, all opening and closing with a soft, wet noise. When they opened, hordes of tiny biters crawled through them and towards these slug-like creatures protruding from the ground. Green acid spewed forth from a sizable orifice on their heads, and the biters swallowed it in large gulps. They seemed to live in symbiosis. The wonder of nature, I thought to myself. I stepped harder on the gas and advanced closer to the nests. By the time the creatures noticed me, it was too late. I flipped a switch on the dashboard of the car, and with a whirring noise, a turret came to life on the hood. A beautiful sight ensued. Great torrents of fire spewed forth from the turret. Jerry was almost touched by one, but he gracefully darted away. Flames engulfed the nest's whole, burning them slowly to a crisp. The biters tried to ambush me, but were soon burned to a crisp as well. The smell, however, was abhorrent. It took around 3 minutes to destroy the nests, and 3 more to make sure there were no survivors. I did feel a twinge of guilt, however. Wiping out swaths of wildlife wasn't something I was really accustomed to, and the reason I was so comfortable with it was because they were the first aggressors. They were vermin, and those must be exterminated. But were they truly vermin? That I didn't really want to delve into right now. I had more pressing matters to dwell on. A week later, as I was on an expedition to scour for any remaining biter nests, I realized it was finally time. It was quite a surreal experience, realizing that this ride back to the factory would be my last. Memories of the past half year played through my mind. The initial crash, the wild assortment of emotions that came with it, the slow, arduous steps I had to take to build the beginnings of the now glorious factory, and the discovery of the biters and their subsequent extermination. It was incredible how much I accomplished in such a short amount of time. It almost defied logic. How could one man do this? I asked myself, and I, once again, couldn't find a sound answer. Maybe Jerry and his friends were partly responsible, or maybe the planet saw my actions fit and somehow aided them. But that was a mystery for another time. I approached the perimeter of the factory and drove up to the giant steel doors that were the entrance. 2 robots flew up from behind the concrete wall, hovered for a couple of seconds, and then flew back down. The steel door slided open with an ominous whir. As soon as I was inside the factory, I quickly set to work. I first started with the blueprint, and that took me an entire week to finalize. Then the acquirement of the necessary materials, of which I need a ton, or rather, multiple tons. My robots made swift work of that, and in a measly 4 days, it was finally ready for construction. I sat atop one of the factory buildings and admired my robots and their elegant efficiency. Flocks of them flew from factory building to another, gathering materials in their metal claws and precisely placing them hundreds of meters away. Hour by hour, it slowly took form, and by the 3rd day, it was finally constructed. The rocket towered above everything else surrounding it, its great shadow engulfing numerous buildings. 3 propulsion tanks were filled to the brim with rocket fuel, ready to launch it into outer space where it could finally return home. After all the final preparations were done and I had said my goodbyes to my dear factory, I climbed the ladder leading to the cockpit. Jerry accompanied me through this, faithful as ever. I reached the top of the rocket, opened the door, and went inside. It wasn't a very spacious room, and it didn't really need to be, as long as it could take me back to Earth. I took a couple of steps to the main terminal, sat down, and started the final checks before I could leave once and for all. But did I have to? I couldn't believe I was asking myself such a question, but in all honesty, the thought had plagued my mind ever since I truly took in the majesty of the factory. I hadn't spent a long time in here, and yet it has already felt like home. The robots, the factory, my creations, all of them being part of a world that I was solely responsible for conceiving. I couldn't leave such a place. This was my magnum opus. Maybe my crash on this planet wasn't a horrible accident meant to end in my demise, but rather a sign from the universe that this is my fate, my destiny, and I had to fulfill it. I stepped down from the rocket and with a clear head, repurposed it for a new objective: exploration. Earth can wait. And besides, the factory wouldn't survive without me, and the factory must grow.